lot to think about there. Where has public health been right? You know, the development of various prescription drugs, um, I think is clearly a win. I think the pharmaceutical innovation has been great. Um, where I was at prior at the Cleveland Clinic, they are one of the leading heart surgery centers in the entire world, and they are increasingly becoming better at various types of procedures and whatnot. But the more I speak, the more I realize that these really aren't public health per se. These are more medicine, and public health is different than medicine. In fact, like they both touch on health, but public health is the idea that you can make government level regulations or government level interventions such that you want to help the entire group. They're basically removed from individual level interventions. So, where has public health actually been helpful in this regard? Man, this is tough. And it kind of speaks to like the issue with public health by treating people as a giant conglomerate instead of trying to go at people by as individuals. Um, Unless like public health is like individually curated to help practitioners, physicians, surgeons, unless it's like actually formulated in that type of way, it usually is going to be harmful. Public health might have actually caused the deaths during the Spanish flu. There was a wonderful Oxford article written about how the public health suggested interventions to treat the Spanish flu probably contributed more to the mortality than the Spanish flu itself, because what was a very common treatment for Spanish flu was toxic levels of aspirin. And because aspirin was somewhat new at the time, they didn't really realize what the toxic levels were. But almost all of the deaths kind of follow what happens if you have toxic levels of aspirin. You have pneumonia that is bacteria formed within your lungs, and sometimes a flu can cause that as well. Sometimes this flu can weaken your immune system, and then bacteria ends up being there as well. But it is suspicious that what we know aspirin causes, it was definitely in many of the biopsies that were performed on people who died, and that the levels of aspirin that were given were certainly toxic. And one thing I actually kind of want to touch on is what happened in the medieval times, because people might say, oh, we need these types of interventions because sometimes drugs are virulent and deadly at the same time. But the Spanish flu, that was virulent. And my guess is that it actually wasn't deadly. It was the government's interventions that were deadly in treating it. And then the same token, what was happening during the plagues, here's like the factor. What is the vector of the disease? So with like flu, COVID, humans are the vector. Humans are spreading it to each other. But if you have a pathogen that spreads not by a human, then the death rate is irrelevant because the vectors aren't being knocked off by the death. The entire thing is that the vector needs to stay alive. And during the plagues, the vector was rats. It really wasn't human to human transmission. It was mostly rat to human transmission, which also speaks to the public health interventions of cleanliness, sewage. So yeah, I guess what public health is doing right now is probably like if there are like efforts to try to cull vermin in the city, that's probably very helpful. Um, if they're keeping sewage clean, that can be very helpful. I know that there's public health efforts in Cleveland to remove lead from the pipes and water, and they're even going into individual houses that have lead pipes and they're trying to cover the pipes or replace them. So there are some issues where public health can be very useful, but that tends to be at maximum like the city level, a municipality level. And once you get to an entire nation, and then you have a public health apparatus that's trying to regulate everyone at once, well, they just don't have enough information to make that effective.
If you liked this video, check out the full interview. Also, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and click the bell icon so you get notified every time a new video is uploaded. Thanks for watching.